You're listening to What's Wrong With This Picture? Freaky Films and Why We Frickin' Love Them. Hi, I'm Lindsay McCullough.
And I'm Gary Mulholland. And in each episode of What's Wrong With This Picture, we'll be looking at a movie we think is weird and wonderful. We sometimes do include the endings where it's key to what the film is, so please be prepared for that. So anyway, buckle up and join us on a journey to dangerous cities, suburbia, and other fantasy worlds. It's going to be a wild ride. This episode's film is The Man Who Would Be King, which is a 1975 action-adventure based on a short story by Rudyard Kipling. It is directed by John Huston. It stars Sean Connery as Daniel Dravot, Michael Caine as Peachy Carnahan, Saeed Jaffrey as Billy Fish, and Christopher Plummer as Rudyard Kipling. It also features Michael Caine's wife Shakira in her fifth and final role in a feature film. The screenplay is by John Huston and Gladys Hill, whose screen credits include three other very weird movies, The Stranger, The Prowler, and Reflections in a Golden Eye, meaning she worked with Huston, Joseph Losey, and Orson Welles. So, Lindsay, what's it all about?
In 1882, Peachy Carnahan and Danny Dravot, blackmailers, pickpockets, conmen and Freemasons, are in India, the jewel in the crown of Queen Victoria's empire. They've left the British Army and decide to travel to Kafiristan on the far side of Afghanistan to make their fortunes. They've met Rudyard Kipling, a fellow Mason, and get him to witness a contract between them, stating that until they are the kings of Kafiristan, they will work together, avoiding drink and women. Arduous journeys and many battles alongside a Gurkha soldier called Billy Fish see them in Sikandargol, the holiest place in Kafiristan, where Danny is mistaken for the mystical son of Alexander the Great and revered as a god. Peachy and Danny see that they can exploit this and can go home rich men with the spoils from their travels, but they need to wait for spring to be able to leave. And in the meantime, Danny has set his sights on local girl Roxanne, putting their contract and so much more at risk. Gary, what's wrong with this picture?
Well, there's a number of things wrong with this picture, but I'm going to start with this, which is the weirdest one for me. I don't normally like this sort of thing, but I love this film. And when I say I don't normally like this sort of thing, I'm not massively into period films. I'm definitely not into ones that are particularly about masculine daring do and, you know, Errol Flynnisms, don't care. Travelogue films, i.e. where an awful lot of the film is dependent on putting a camera on a exotic vista, I don't generally like them very much. Not interested in Rudyard Kipling or books or anything, you know, based on his work. And I'm not very keen on yarns. It's all of those things. And yet, there is something about this film that is absolutely blistering and adds up to something much more than those things in themselves.
Yeah.
Second thing is Freemasons.
Yeah.
I don't think there's been too many plots based quite so much on Freemasonry and where it's all seemed so weird. And the third thing is The Man Who Would Be King a racist film, or is this The Man Who Would Be King a film that seems racist because its characters are racist and the regime that is depicting are racist? And that, I think, is not entirely clear.
I think that's a really good question, and I do want to get into that in a bit, actually. But in terms of why I think it's weird, I think actually it's weird. It's a weird film for us to choose. It's weird that we should be doing this.
Totally.
Because on the surface, it is this Hollywood epic, which is not normally what we do.
Nope.
It is this adventure story, as you say. It's told in flashback. It's got this kind of grandeur in filmmaking, this kind of Lawrence of Arabia type scale in terms of its visuals. So is it weird at all? I think would be a reasonable question to ask, and therefore why are we doing it? And I do think it's weird. I think, first of all, these kind of swashbuckling ones, these adventure stories, the protagonists aren't generally doomed. They generally come out on top.
This is really key.
This is really key. This is told in flashback, so we know right from the start that something has happened to these adventurers. So that's not a spoiler. Also, I think it's weird because this is kind of the last of its kind. This is the last hurrah of this kind of film, because just round the corner, there's a big shark with a theme tune, and it is coming to bite the legs of all films like this.
And
Jaws is same year, and it's going to change things. So this film, little bit of a dinosaur.
yeah, a little bit of a dinosaur, and I want to make a Jurassic Park joke, but in point of fact, in 2 years after this film, an even bigger spaceship is going to come along, and on a big planet in a big universe, which is going to wipe these films out, like you say, like the mammals wiped out the dinosaurs. So yeah, it is a throwback, and it's very interesting what you said about the doomed protagonists, because it really struck me. This is probably, I think, the fourth time I've watched this film, and it's the first time it really struck me that it's a film noir plot, and how interesting that is, because John Huston, the director, is often credited with inventing film noir, accidentally, unconsciously, with his 1941 film The Maltese Falcon. And throughout his career, most of his films, the preoccupation is with central protagonists, male, who go on a quest, definitely, usually for money, for something to do with greed, and never get there, and they fail. And there's a sort of wry grin at the end of his films about these guys were always doomed to fail. And Man Who Would Be King is completely in that tradition. It has a classic noir framing, i.e. you see somebody who's already at the end of the story first, so that something really, really, really bad has happened to this guy. Their story is told in flashback. There is an awful lot of stuff about fate and destiny, and how these two men have to follow the path that they're following, even though it's a ridiculous path, and they are from the beginning doomed to fail, and give themselves up to their fate, if not gladly, then with
good cheer and good heart and a song.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. And a very much of a film noir, I was always a loser type of thing going on. And but of course, this film looks less like film noir than any film that you could possibly think of. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that kind of leads into the, on the surface, this is a very pro-empire film. Rudyard Kipling famously is kind of pro-empire. He was born in India, and that has led to some kind of questioning and kind of cancellation, really, of his kind of colonial views. So on the surface, this film looks very kind of pro-empire, but it's actually quite slyly anti-colonial, I think, in a lot of ways. So Danny and Peachy are training kind of some native villagers to be an army, and at one point Danny says to them, the army is about people doing things unthinkingly. He says, do you think if a man thought twice he would give his life for king and country? Not bloody likely. So that, and also at a later stage he dreams of meeting Queen Victoria on equal terms, as her kind of cousin, he calls himself. So that kind of patriotic deference that you might expect to see in a film about empire or colony isn't here. And the film
delusions of grandeur.
Exactly, and the film kind of undercuts that. So Danny's delusions of grandeur are Queen Victoria's delusions of grandeur, is the West's delusions of grandeur.
Yeah, I agree.
And interesting you say film noir, because a film that came into my mind unbidden, I was watching this, and it's a very unlikely film. But if you think about the story in the film about underestimating people at your peril, or underestimating cultures at your peril. So your Western civilization, your plans, your fighting skills, your supposed greater intelligence that was kind of the focus of like the white man's burden, as Rudyard Kipling said, that white people had a duty to go and in quotes civilize the rest of the world. That these things can be no match sometimes for people's faith, for people's shared customs, shared value, for people's history. I suddenly thought, this is Deliverance.
Yes. Totally. Towards the end, it's Deliverance, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah, you have a good point. And it's really, the more we talk about it, the more I think, yeah, no, it's John Huston and Gladys Hill, because let's credit her, have plainly gone out to subvert Rudyard Kipling. I mean, Rudyard Kipling, by the way, is not in his own short story. They choose that as a device, and Christopher Plummer is wonderful.
He's great.
And is so much like what we think Rudyard Kipling is, that he sort of replaces Rudyard Kipling in the public imagination. He is so good. But it's fascinating in the sense of, because at one point, when they've gone through their enormous, ridiculous quest across these snow-covered tundras and mountains for this ridiculous dream of we're essentially going to find some lost tribe and then we'll turn them into an army and then we'll take over the world, kind of thing, whatever. They finally meet these, and the thing you said about it's an Englishman's job to be, that's almost a direct quote. One of them actually says this is what the English do. We civilise the lower orders and, whatever. And the leader of the tribe, through an interpreter who is the character Billy Fish, asks if they are gods. And Sean Connery says, not gods, but Englishmen, which is the next best thing.
Yeah. And that was absolutely the colonial imperial mindset, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking at one point, what a brilliant double bill. If you wanted to have a double bill of film showings with mates, is this followed by Triple R. Yeah, absolutely. Both sides of this particular sense of what the British Raj were.
So Triple R, if anybody hasn't seen that, is a film set in India in the 20s with absolute kind of heroism on the Indian side and absolute craven servility and stupidity on the English side. And
full on fascism, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I say England rather than Britain because
it's English.
It's English rather than
of course
kind
it
of
is.
UK or Britain, I kind of think so.
Sidebar, because one really interesting thing about this is I was watching it again, and good old David Thompson. David Thompson's my favourite film critic, and so I do mention him quite a lot on these podcasts. But I was sitting there watching it this time, thinking this film would never have got made if Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid hadn't been such a big hit. It is so based on the male buddy thing, and everybody's obsession with male buddies, which lasted probably until this film, and everybody kind of got themselves out of it a bit.
Maybe say that.
Well, maybe
Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say 48 hours.
All of those.
Yeah,
all of those.
Okay. No, you're right.
Recently, the other guys. Male buddy movies never go out of fashion.
And The Nice Guys. Have you seen that? Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe.
Yes, I have seen that one. Yeah.
But anyway, you're right, buddies. So so I really do think that Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is the reason films like this get made, and this film got made. And then I pick up a David Thompson book, and it turns out that the first person offered this role was Paul Newman. And Paul Newman turned around, and God love him, and said, no, this has to be two Englishmen, Connery and Caine. Now, of course, there's something slightly wrong with that because, Sean Connery's Scottish. But it was his idea. No, don't even think about me and Bob Redford. Go get those two, because this is about the English, and they've got to be British. So good for Paul Newman.
Yeah, absolutely. I did read that those two were offered the part, but John Huston had also been trying to make this film for ages and ages. And he had initially thought of Clark Gable and Humphrey Bogart.
Oh, my Lord.
Then he had rethought it for Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. It makes even better sense than Bogart and Gable, and that would have been great.
Yeah. And then he thought about Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole.
Oh, that would have been a disaster.
And and then Redford and Newman. And it's funny with those because I haven't read this part for this one for this part, this one for that part, but it's clear that in all of these there's like... so in this film, Danny is vain and dumb, and Peachy is shrewd, but always going to be the second in command, kind of leads from behind.
Yes.
And in all of these pairings, you can see Well, Gable's the vain dumb one, and Bogart's the clever one. Burt Lancaster is the vain dumb one, and Douglas is the Richard Burton, Peter O'Toole. Peter O'Toole's going to be the vain dumb one.
They're just the drunk ones.
They are the drunk
Let's
ones.
face it.
And Redford and Newman are going to play the parts that they played.
The
vain dumb one and the shrewd one.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so obviously when Huston first came up with this, he absolutely thought it through. It is amazing that it took 25 years or so for it to actually get to the screen. But I think Connery and Caine are perfect. Mm-hmm. With Michael Caine, it's among his best performances.
Absolutely.
With Sean Connery, it is his best performance.
I think so, because I think he's got less of a choice to choose his best performances from, really. I mean, he won the Oscar for The Untouchables. You know, you put one of theirs in a hospital, we'll put one of ours in a morgue.
It was a sympathy Oscar.
Yeah. Kind of
long service Oscar.
He has been obviously very vocal about how silly he found the Bond films, and his last Bond film, Diamonds Are Forever, in 1971, so a little bit before that.
There was don't you remember Never Say Never Again?
His last Bond film up until this point, I should have said.
Yes, right.
And then his later one. But you're right, he's absolutely great in it and has the right kind of vacuity and kind of sense of his own entitlement, and this is key. So he's clearly the one, as I said in my plot, he is the one who is presumed to be this kind of godlike figure, and he's the one who makes it all go wrong. His hubris is what brings them down.
Absolutely.
So he's great.
Yeah.
But Michael Caine, oh my,
he's brilliant.
God's own trousers, as they say in
God's own trousers. God's holy trousers.
God's holy trousers. Michael
That's
Caine
his catchphrase.
is incredible.
Yes. Yeah, no, he is. And it's, I think, but just to mention Sean Connery one more time, he wasn't given many chances to do comedy. And this is essentially what his performance is in Man. It's black comedy in the end, but that's essentially what it is. And it turns out he can do comedy, and I just don't think producers and everybody saw him that way, and that's a shame because he might have been very good at it. Michael Caine is the ultimate actor that, you know, he, even more than Nicolas Cage, he'll turn up to any script that pays him enough money, and he's been very vocal about it and unashamed about it. There is no hypocrisy in Michael Caine's presentation of his career. But he also betrays whether he cares about the script or not when he gets on camera. And if he doesn't care about the script, he sleepwalks through it. And if he does care about the script and does care about the director and does care about his co-stars and whatever, he absolutely smashes things out the park. And this is right up there with his performances in Alfie, in Get Carter, in The Quiet American, in The Honorary Consul, you know, the ones where he is really outstandanding.
Yeah.
And
can I add the Muppet Christmas Carol?
You can
because
add the Muppet Christmas Carol.
In that one.
You can add the Muppet Christmas Carol because you're right. And I would also, I guess the thing about his performance here is he has to present somebody venal. He's an awful person. Sean Connery's dumb. He's dumb and easily led by Michael Caine's character. Yeah. Michael Caine's horrible, and yet he has to do that thing of, you know, I'm presenting it to the screen that I'm a horrible venal person with not a moral, and you still want to spend the time with me. Yeah, it's the toughest thing for actors or actresses to pull off. We were having a little conversation earlier about what our favourite anti-heroines were, you know, and this is a classic anti-hero performance from Michael Caine, and he's absolutely excellent.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I think I was just thinking when you said, you know, he will sleepwalk through things. And as you know, I have seen more than one Steven Seagal film. And the one he directed, On Deadly Ground, Michael Caine is the antagonist in that. His hair is dyed black for some reason. Looks terrible.
Wow.
He absolutely sleepwalks through this. Wow. And I was just in my head. I mean, you know, Steven Seagal is no great actor, to say the least.
No.
But Michael Caine makes him look like Robert De Niro in this one. He is awful. He is awful. And in my head...
Oh, wow.
In my head, I was just thinking about, you know, he'll sleepwalk through a Steven Seagal film and yet give his all to the
John
Muppets.
Oh, and Muppet Christmas Carol. Sorry, yeah.
So it's just like, you know, where does he see the more kind of... the more reasonable humanity lies with the Muppets than with Steven Seagal. Anyway, little sidebar, but Michael Caine is incredible in this film.
He really is. He really is. And we brought up the thing about racism.
Mm-hmm.
So, Lindsay, what do you think? As you said, you painted a really interesting picture. Rudyard Kipling's almost been cancelled for his views on white colonialism and, that the British Raj was a good thing. This is a Rudyard Kipling adaptation that actually puts Rudyard Kipling sort of in the middle of the action. And there are some terrible things said about both women and people in the indigenous culture by these characters. And where do you stand on this? Is it a film that is at its heart racist, or is it a film about a racist culture?
Yeah. Can I sit on the fence and say perhaps a bit of both? Because you're right, that it should be said, this is an absolute huge cast, the huge cast of extras. And there is one shot which I would have thought was a drone shot, but actually couldn't have been in those days. So it was a crane shot, this really high crane shot of a kind of caravan of people that they have trained, men that they have trained in their villages to kind of go and then take over other villages on their quest to become kings of Kafiristan. Kafiristan, I should say, sounds like just a racist name, actually was a real place and is to this day part of Afghanistan. I don't think they use that name anymore, but it was a real place.
Good knowledge.
So there's this caravan of maybe 1,000 extras. So this is a film with a huge cast, but there are 4 main speaking parts. There's Peachy, there's Danny, there's Rudyard Kipling, and there's Billy Fish, played by Cy Jaffrey. Other characters speak. There's a kind of craven idiot who's the head of the first village that they come to.
Exactly.
And then there's the holy man who both anoints.
Has a lot of presence, actually.
Yeah, has a lot of presence. Who both anoints and then destroys Sean Connery's character, Danny Dravit. So in this film, the natives, I say that, the indigenous people, the local people, are cowardly, easily tricked, stupid, superstitious, brutal. And is this the fault of Rudyard Kipling and the 1880s, or is this the fault of John Huston and the 1970s? And
I've not read the original short story. Maybe if I'd gone and read the original short story, like us media types are supposed to do, then I might be able to give you more of an answer.
Yeah, if we'd done actually
any
more research. Exactly. So, but I think the fact remains that there are no real Indian, Afghan or Kafiristan actual characters that we get to know as people. Partly that's a language thing because Billy Fish acts as the interpreter for all of that. But Billy Fish, I would say, is a great presence. He is a really great presence. He doesn't have a lot of screen time, and the actor is Cy Jaffrey, immensely well-respected actor, had been going for years and years and years, became really big in Britain in the 80s in films like My Beautiful Laundrette or The Jewel in the Crown he was in. He was in a sitcom called Tandoori Nights, which I have a vague
bloody hell, that's going back a bit.
I'm sure did him no service whatsoever. Nonetheless, the fact remains that despite his relatively kind of supporting role in this, despite his kind of broken English that he has to affect, and in fact that clearly was not the case at all. Yes, by Jove and golly gosh and all that kind of stuff. Nonetheless, he is a presence in this film and does something, I think, to maybe dilute the racism that's present on screen.
I almost want to talk about, because, perhaps we should have the little conversation. Like, I think we can talk about the ending of this without saying every detail of what happens at the end, because I do think the last act is so crucial to why this really does stand up as a great film.
Yeah.
But it has a little disappointment in it for me, which is the end of Billy Fish's story, because I think the film slightly builds him up a little bit as he's cleverer than the 2 idiots that he's following, and that he's the one that sees this for what it is and is going to kind of get himself out of it. And then the fact that he doesn't leaves me a little disappointed.
I do get that. I think that's playing on that kind of reputation he's playing a Gurkha who are these kind of soldiers generally from Nepal and India that were forced to or wanted to, were forced to probably join the British Army for various things, and their reputation is one of kind of bravery and loyalty and. But in itself, that's a colonial attitude, isn't it?
Yeah.
That, people are grateful for the opportunity to die for Queen and country, or King and country. And so that is a little bit of a trope. They offer him the way out. Peachy says to him, take that mule and get out, save yourself. And he declines that offer.
Yeah.
He wants a more heroic death. And in some ways you can be...
for me.
In some ways you can be disappointed in that. In some ways that underlines the kind of aren't Gurkhas brave and loyal.
I guess I want him to be the smart one that goes, yeah, I had nothing to do with this idiocy. I'm out.
Yeah.
But fair play.
Yeah. The other thing about Saeed Jaffrey that I found out was that he was the one who introduced him and his wife, Madhur. So Madhur Jaffrey, the cook, was his first wife. They were married for 6 years and they had kids together. They introduced through various things because they were big on the Indian theatrical scene and Indian movie scene, and big in actually he was part of the actors studio. So Saeed Jaffrey was method, and they lived in America for the longest time. Yeah,
did not know that.
They introduced James Ivory to Ishmael Merchant way back.
No way.
Now, did you know this, or am I the last person in the world to know this? They were a couple. Merchant and Ivory were a couple.
You're not the last person to know this. It sort of, I'm going to say it became increasingly obvious to me over the last couple of years. It just, not because I sort of read it somewhere and it went, oh, of course they're a couple. It's just, there was a certain sensibility in their films and I began to realise, oh, actually, yeah, they're a couple. Yeah, of course they are. I just didn't really think about it.
Oh, well, that's a bit anticlimactic. I thought you were going to hit the roof and say, no way.
No, but what it is, the sadness is, of the 80s, when they were at their peak of popularity, is that even in the 80s, when half of British culture was playing gay all over the top of the bloody pops and, and whatever, two people couldn't just go, by the way, we're filmmakers and men and a couple. They still had to sort of obscure it and not really say it and whatever. And that makes me just a bit sad. But yeah, I was kind of aware.
Well, there you go. My gaydar strikes again. My lack of gaydar strikes again.
Well, it's not like they were particularly visible figures, is it?
No, true.
They kept themselves. They presented.
And I'm not sure
films.
I could pick them pictorially out of a lineup. So
no.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. One last thing about Saeed Jaffrey before we get back to the film. He did a spoken word recording of the Karma Sutra in the 60s, which Time magazine hailed one of the best spoken word records ever made.
Wow. Blimey. Which brings us neatly back to the film.
Yes. All right then.
And one of the, because we're still sticking with what's weird, is the changes of tone. I think it has three specific changes of tone. So the first act is action adventure with a bit of comedy, kind of thing. Then it abruptly changes to a second tone, which is darker, because up until this point, I'm sitting there watching it again for, only a few days ago and thinking, oh, this is a film for all the family. I know there's a bit of killing and a bit of violence and whatever, but, no, it's a family film. And then suddenly it just changes tone, and it's Saeed Jaffrey who pretty much signals it by at some point basically announcing that they'd caught the neighbouring tribe's leader or whatever, and him announcing, now the women will cut his bollocks off. Yeah. And it's like, okay. And then we get this scene where the tribal leader, who is presented as an idiot, is attempting to honour Connery and Caine. And then it goes into really dodgy territory on every level, but it's so weird, where he's basically talking about the fact he's got 27 daughters and 32 sons, which yeah, no. But okay. And then he basically offers any one of his daughters to them to have sex with, which is like, what? And then when they say, oh, no, we've signed a contract, because there's this contract, you see, they've signed together, which becomes a plot point later on. They've signed this contract that there will be no women until they achieve everything they set out to achieve, which is basically for one of them to be a king, or for both of them to be kings. And they start going on about this contract, thank you very much. And the next thing is, in saying something to Billy Fish, and Billy Fish saying, oh, yes, well, if you prefer boys, he's got 32 of those. And it's just like, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that's, but it's, boys. It doesn't say young men.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, this isn't a family film at all, is it?
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily saying that this is. Obviously, no one's doing this scene in 2023. Let's be just plain and honest.
No one's remaking this film.
No one's remaking this film in 2023, unless
it's a complete
somebody
reversal.
from India, by Pooley, took charge of it and just did it from completely the other angle. But that scene is just kind of really uncomfortable, and it's going full on about paedophilia. It's going full on about incest. It's and whatever, and you suddenly realise, this wasn't a film aimed at the whole family. This wasn't a film aimed at kids. And then it has a third act, which I think goes full on down the horror route. And I wondered what you thought of that and whether you agreed.
It's certainly tense. And yeah, I guess for me, it has the tension that you often find in horror films. So earlier we were talking about Jodie Foster and The Silence of the Lambs. That kind of, I'm kind of short of breath because I know something terrible is going to happen, and I don't quite know what it is or when it's going to happen. So yeah, I think it certainly does go down that route. I mean, it does not end well for Billy Fish. Briefly, kind of off screen, it doesn't end well for Peachy, and it doesn't end well for Danny.
Well, actually, the bit where I was sitting there thinking, now this is horror, but this section of the film is the wedding.
Okay.
So, just to sort of a bit of plot, the bit where it all goes wrong, the bit where Danny's hubris just takes him to doom, is the priests insist that they have charmed and convinced that he is the son of Alexander the Great, which is a whole thing in itself, insist that a god, and he's a god, cannot have sex with a human woman because she will simply set on fire and explode. It's a physical impossibility. However, he is a god. He has decided in himself, and he gets what he wants. And he wants Roxanne, who is played by Shakira Caine, Michael Caine's wife. And he insists he is going to marry her. And why this to me is a great horror scene is because this could be like, at this point, they all go, yeah, no, that's not happening. We're not having it. Chase them out of town. Whatever. No, they go, the whole village, the whole tribe, whatever you want to call it, goes with the wedding. And the wedding is like these tribal drums. Then the priests, you can't even really tell whether they're priests or nuns because they are completely in black, and that includes their faces. This is like I
think those are women.
Right. This is a black mass.
Yeah.
We're watching. It's a black mass. It is the devil's work, even though it's in bright sunshine. And Shakira Caine, who does not have a speaking line in this, but she does an amazing job she basically, her eyes roll into the back of her head, and what the implication is either she's possessed by spirits, and there is a sort of element of speaking in tongues thing going on with the nuns, or she's been drugged.
Yeah.
Just take your pick of those two.
Yeah, okay. I hadn't really considered that at all. Yeah.
And then, rather than do what he says, she bites him. And the drawing of blood proves what they all surely knew in the first place. He's no god.
Yeah.
He's a man. And the whole thing falls apart. But I think it's beautifully shot, despite the fact it's in broad daylight. And we've talked about the fact that if you could shoot a horror scene in broad daylight, you've got some serious chops going on. That is 3 or 4 minutes of sheer horror. The fight at the end is not. It's a battle scene. It's scary, you know, and because they're completely outnumbered and whatever. But that 3 or 4 minutes is horror. It's like something from a sort of Hammer folk horror movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that as soon as Danny makes this decision, Peachy knows the game's up and is trying to get out. And in fact, should have left before the wedding. But Danny says to him, you know, pretty much, you're my best man. See me up the aisle and then go and take all your riches with you. And Peachy knows that it's done. And at the end, Danny says to him, Peachy, I've got you killed. I've got you killed. You should have been going home a rich man. I've got you killed. Will you forgive me? And he says, full and frank, with no strings attached kind of thing. I can't remember the exact phrase.
Yeah.
I do, and gladly.
And gladly.
Yeah. And so Danny says, well, then everything's all right then. And that's indicative of the brotherhood these guys have, partly through being Masons, and this is how they meet Rudyard Kipling, in that at the start, Peachy has stolen the watch from Rudyard Kipling's watch because he's a pickpocket. He opens it up and there's a Masonic symbol, and he realises that he has stolen the watch of his kind of fraternal brother. All brothers are fraternal. His stolen the watch of his Masonic brother, and therefore makes effort to return it to kind of redress that wrong, and that's how they meet Rudyard Kipling. And actually, the Masonic kind of insignia and kind of history are kind of key plot points in this film as well. And so right at the end, they bring it back to those kind of fraternal feelings, where he says, "I forgive you freely and fully, like nothing's ever happened." And it's quite a tender moment.
But do you think there's a bit where it suddenly old John Huston and Gladys Hill go all meta? Because I think there is.
Go on then.
It's when Danny has got Peachy to come see him, and he's telling him, I'm not going. Because until this point, they're still supposed to be sticking to a plan where they're going to steal all this treasure that they've been given and they're going to go. And basically, he's fallen in love with being a god. He doesn't want to leave a place where he's a god, is what it comes down to. And he's talking to him, and his justification is it's his destiny. And what he uses as his destiny is the ridiculously convoluted plot of the movie. And it's basically a character from a story saying, you know, all these plot points that they have put me through that make no fucking sense whatsoever. Like, you know, Rudyard Kipling suddenly gives me a necklace and 15 years later it saves my life, sort of thing. It isn't 15 years, by the way. It's matter of weeks. But all of these things mean that this is fate and destiny. Yeah. And I just loved this. I loved that scene. And it was one of those things, you've got all these action scenes and battle scenes and set pieces and avalanches and fights and whatever. And I think maybe my favourite scene in the whole film, although the wedding is pretty fucking great, is them two in a room with John Huston using good old-fashioned director trick of the bamboo curtain in between them. So you neither can see the other's face and just exemplifying the enormous gap between them now of understanding. And Sean Connery basically reciting the plot of the film and saying, so I'm destined to stay here. and it's just like, oh, that's genius. That's a bit of screenwriting genius. And it's so beautifully shot and so well acted by the pair of them. And the only conflict they have, and you can really feel the conflict, like they're really close to having it out right there. And they're like a married couple who have just absolutely, broken the other's heart and traversed, just absolutely insulted the other. Yeah. And it's just great.
And there's a scene earlier which is really beautiful as well, I think, where they're on their way to Kafiristan and they get so far, and then there's this uncrossable chasm. They can't get any further, and they're in the snowy mountains at this point. And so they realise the end is coming, and Danny is kind of like, I'm not going to freeze to death over days or starve to death. And Peachy's like, don't worry, I'll do the necessary. So Peachy, again,
Yes.
he has to take
Takes the
charge.
lead.
He
Yeah.
has to be the one who's going to kill them both.
Yep.
But then they start reminiscing and they start laughing, and their loud laughter causes another avalanche, which handily fills in the chasm. And so they can go on. So that kind of pact between them and that shared history is what enables them to make this journey.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I've just made that. Okay. Just thought about that. But I wanted to say something about Shakira Caine. So,
Yes.
John Huston had trouble kind of casting this role. They're all out to dinner one night. Cast are all out to dinner. Shakira Caine is there, and Michael's like, why not use Shakira? So so Shakira Caine has a part in the film. She was a Miss Guyana in 1967, I think, and came third in Miss World. And I was just thinking about the attraction of all these 70s guys for Miss World. Like, Bruce Forsyth was married to a Miss World.
George Best had to go out with a Miss World and a Miss Universe and a Miss Great Britain. I think there was all of them in there somewhere.
And I was just thinking, what is this? And I realised it's like, okay, men think their wives are beautiful, but how do they know that their wife is more beautiful than your wife? Where's the Premier League for wives? And it's Miss World. Yeah. It's like, numerically, my wife is hotter than your wife.
If you look at the guys that went down that road, and it was definitely a moment of its era, famous men who marry or go out with beauty queens. They were all from working class backgrounds. It wasn't the ones who were to the manor born of stardom or whatever. It was George Best. It was Michael Caine. It was these sort of guys, and they were the ultimate trophy, weren't they?
Yeah. I
think that thing you've just said, where's the league table of beautiful women? The only one is, well, I've got a Miss Great Britain. I've got a Miss World. Beat that.
Just to say that the script, I think, is beautiful. Some of the language is really amazing. And there's a bit at the start, so when Peachy is talking to Kipling, and this is before the flashback starts, and something has clearly physically happened to him. He looks very different, and he says to Kipling, "Keep looking at me. It helps to keep my soul from flying off," which is just lovely. And Kipling says to him, "Can it be you? Is it you, Peachy?" He says, "The same and not the same who sat beside you on the train." I feel like crying. That's just so beautiful.
Yeah. Some of the dialogue in that film is absolutely awesome. Yeah. It really is. It's so elegant. And there's no need. It's one of those things about when you've got people from the old school doing stuff like that, you don't have to put elegant dialogue in it. We were 1975, we were around the corner. We're talking about, it's round the corner to Jaws and it's round the corner to Star Wars. It's also round the corner to Rambo, and where if the action hero grunted, the audience were happy as long as they killed 30, 100 Vietnamese people. So the idea that your action heroes, although neither of them exactly are, but your adventurers have elegant dialogue, no.
And again, I don't know if those are direct quotes from the Kipling story or whether they're from the screenplay.
Perhaps we better read some Rudyard Kipling.
Well, maybe
or not.
That would have been useful information 90% ago.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was going to just mention John Huston because he is a really interesting and quite major figure in American film. He directed 37 movies over 45 years. He apparently had acting roles, according to Letterboxd, it says 92.
Really?
But I suspect, I'm going to go for a big old guess and say half of those were in documentaries and et cetera, at least half. But he was in more than we thought. He wasn't just Noah Cross in Chinatown. He wrote
fabulous though he is in that, actually.
Well, he won. Did he win a Best Supporting Oscar? He might have, or he was nominated, I think. He interesting things. He studied as an artist in Paris before he became a filmmaker, and much like Alfred Hitchcock, he drew every scene in his films beforehand, and therefore studios loved using him because he created a finished product on set. It didn't need to be edited into one afterwards. None of this. There's a million miles of film which then has to be made into a film. he storyboarded it all out, and then he's shot it exactly as it's intended to be. He won 2 Oscars, and he directed both his father, Walter Huston, and his daughter, Angelica Huston, to their own Best Actor Oscars.
Excellent.
And the other thing I did want to mention is, because I love the way this film is framed. I do. This is the only way I can ask this question, hopefully without entirely giving away. At the end, are you screaming? Are you doing Brad Pitt going, "What's in the bag? What's in the bag?"
Not really. Not really.
Oh, what's in the bag?
Not really. I think it's clear.
Do you think at the beginning you know exactly what is?
Do I know at the beginning? No, but I know from halfway through what's in that bag if I'm thinking about what's in that bag. Just because it becomes a kind of regularly used theme, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it is interesting that, again, there's a real element of horror movie to the ending, and it's just made me think about the fact that it's a few years later that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas make Raiders of the Lost Ark. And one of the big shocks about that film, because obviously, again, it's a yarn, it's in foreign countries, there are, natives that don't really do anything except they're there to make Harrison Ford look good, on and on and on and on. And the big shock of that film was the ending and how horrific it was. Yeah. And I do wonder if maybe Spielberg and Lucas watched Man Who Would Be King and went,
I'd be astonished if they hadn't. Absolutely astonished. George Lucas, I don't know what films he's seen. Probably not that many. Spielberg's seen everything. Yeah. And has taken not all of his ideas. I don't mean that. Of course, he's got ideas, but has soaked up all those influences and kind of used them to his own end. So I'd be astonished if he wasn't familiar with that. This film, I love it. And watching it again, talking about it again, I've spoken over the top of you several times in this just because I've been quite excited.
Me too.
It's a really good film to be talking about. So let's rate it as we do for quality and for weirdness. I'm going to go first because I always bring you in first. I'm going to go first. I'm going to go first today. And I'm going to talk about Golden Crowns.
Okay.
Golden Crowns for me, quality, it's somewhere between a 9 and a 10. Oof. And if it's not a 10, it's because it's sometimes an uncomfortable watch from the cultural supremacy point of view. Yeah. And so therefore I'm giving it 9 Golden Crowns for quality and I'm giving it 8 Golden Crowns for weird.
I'm giving it 9 Golden Crowns for quality and 7 Golden Crowns for weird. I was surprised, this was a Lindsay suggestion that we did this one. I was totally up for it because I've watched it many times in my life. But I did wonder as I sat down and watched it this week, is this going to be the week that the time I either look at it and go, it's not weird though, or look at it and go, I don't like it. I couldn't believe, I was mesmerised all over again. And even though I was aware of all of the things that are problematic, they were in my face, I still couldn't kind of I just love it. It's my favourite epic film. I don't like epics. There's this and there's Spartacus. Oh, and there's Lawrence of Arabia. There you go. There's only 3 that I like. Yeah. And
this is one of them. God's Holy Trousers. What a movie. Till next time.
Till next time. What's Wrong with This Picture is brought to you by Lindsay McCulloch and Gary Mulholland and is recorded by Russ Keffert at Audio Egg. Music composed and performed by Russ Keffert.